Ava Morgan, 34, found out on a Tuesday. It was the kind of afternoon that should have been forgettable. Overcast skies, school pickup traffic, lukewarm coffee in her travel mug. She was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her husband Eric's iPad, looking for a recipe she'd bookmarked weeks ago. What she found instead was a text thread that changed everything. "Last night was amazing. Still tasting you on my lips." It wasn't from her. At first, she didn't react. Her fingers hovered over the screen as if the message would disappear if she stared hard enough. But then she scrolled, and kept scrolling. Dozens of texts, some flirty, some graphic, some painfully intimate in their familiarity. They talked about the kids, the house, her. And there, nestled between a selfie of Madison in one of Ava's old sweaters and a message about how much she missed Eric's hands on her, was a time-stamped photo taken in the very bed Ava shared with her husband. The worst part? Madison wasn't just some nameless fling. She was someone Ava knew, someone she had trusted. 25, blonde, bubbly, and barely 2 years out of college. She had started babysitting for them when Ava was on deadline and needed backup. What began as the occasional date night sitter turned into more hours, then overnights, then weekends. Madison had keys to the house. She knew the alarm code. The dog loved her. The kids adored her. And apparently, so did Eric. Ava didn't cry. Not right away. She just sat there, her breath shallow, the sounds of her children playing Minecraft in the living room echoing faintly down the hallway. The world tilted, but she kept her spine straight. She read every word, every emoji, every "I wish she didn't exist," and "When will you tell her?" With the stillness of a woman watching her own life dissolve in front of her, and refusing to look away. When Eric came home that night, he kissed her on the cheek like nothing had changed, asked what was for dinner, commented on the weather. Ava nodded, smiled faintly, and excused herself to run a bath. She soaked in silence for over an hour. No wine, no candles, just hot water and the clarity that comes with betrayal so sharp it carves clean through denial. She could scream. She could rage. She could throw him out and let the pieces scatter wherever they fell. But Ava Morgan wasn't going to shatter. She was going to sharpen. And Madison? Madison was going to learn exactly what it felt like to stand in the glow of a woman she tried to destroy. And watch that woman rise higher than she ever imagined. Ava wouldn't just take her life back. She'd make Madison watch her win. The next morning, Ava dressed like nothing had happened. She slipped into her favorite navy blouse, the one that made her feel capable, polished, untouchable. She packed the kids' lunches, dropped them off at school, waved at the crossing guard, and even picked up a coffee for Eric on her way back, all while her insides burned cold with precision. She had read the messages again that morning, not because she needed confirmation, but because she wanted the ache to settle deeper. She didn't want time to blunt the betrayal. She needed to feel it, remember it, use it. Eric was in the kitchen when she returned, wearing joggers and poring over his laptop like the loyal husband she used to believe he was. He smiled when she handed him the coffee. "You're too good to me," he said without irony. She almost laughed. Instead, she kissed his cheek. "Busy day?" He nodded, already absorbed in whatever spreadsheet made him feel important. Ava took her seat at the island across from him, pulling out her own laptop and pretending to scroll through emails while her mind was somewhere else entirely. She wasn't going to confront him yet. Number that would be too easy for him. A blow-up, an apology, a few tears, and then what? A reset? Some therapy session they'd both half commit to? Ava didn't want closure. She wanted consequences, so she began quietly shifting things, checking the status of their joint accounts, pulling up the prenup her lawyer friend had helped her draft just in case 5 years ago, rereading it with new eyes. She started saving copies of text threads, timestamps, and even a photo of Madison's lingerie she found tucked at the back of her sock drawer. By the afternoon, Ava had called in a favor with HR at her firm. She asked for a recommendation on live-in childcare. The woman on the other end was surprised. You always said you liked handling things on your own? Ava smiled faintly. I've decided I could use the help. Later that evening, while Eric played with the kids on the floor, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the edge of the hallway watching them. He looked up at her and smiled, his usual effortless grin that used to make her feel safe. It didn't anymore. It made her feel nothing. And in that nothingness, Ava found a terrifying kind of power. The version of her that once begged for honesty was gone. The version that doubted herself, that wondered if she was enough. Dead. All that was left now was the woman who would invite her husband's mistress back into her home, not to forgive, but to let her feel what it's like to be outclassed in every way. Ava sipped her wine and smiled to herself. Let the game begin. 3 days later, Ava sent the message. It was short, simple, deceptively warm. Hey, Madison. I heard you're between jobs right now. We're looking for a full-time nanny for the kids, live-in. Thought of you first. Let me know if you're interested. Timing couldn't be better. She read it twice before hitting send. There was no malice in the words, no passive-aggressive tone. Just that same gentle professionalism Ava had perfected over the years, the kind that made people underestimate her. Madison replied within 10 minutes. Wow, really? I'd love to. Are you sure? I thought things were weird with me and Eric. LOL. Ava stared at that line for a long time, the audacity wrapped in a nervous giggle. She didn't reply right away. She wanted Madison to sit in that uncertainty, to wonder if she'd said too much. Then, after an hour, she responded, Of course. That's all water under the bridge. We're moving forward. I just need someone I can trust with the kids. The word trust wasn't a mistake. Ava wanted her to see it, to choke on it. They scheduled the interview for Sunday afternoon. Ava spent the morning making the house spotless, but not staged. She didn't want Madison to feel intimidated. Yet, she wanted her relaxed, open, caught off guard. Eric hadn't said a word about Madison since Ava discovered the affair. Because as far as he knew, she hadn't. She kept everything normal. Their conversations, their routine, their bedroom. Her silence unnerved him more than any confrontation would have. By the time Madison arrived, Ava was prepared. She greeted her with a warm smile and a casual hug, noting how Madison's eyes darted toward the hallway, toward the bedroom, then back again. Her hair was curled, makeup done with more care than usual. Ava could practically smell the nerves under her perfume. I'm surprised you reached out, Madison said as they sat in the kitchen. Ava poured them both tea. We all make mistakes, she replied smoothly. This isn't about the past. It's about the kids. They adore you, and I need help. Madison blinked, visibly relieved. I didn't think you'd ever want me back here. Ava smiled, soft and disarming. You're good at what you do, and I believe in second chances. That last line landed. Ava saw it in the way Madison looked down at her tea, ashamed, unsure. But that's what Ava wanted. Just enough comfort to make her stay, just enough unease to make her squirm. The interview lasted 20 minutes. Ava covered the hours, the expectations, the perks of the live-in arrangement. Madison asked a few tentative questions, but mostly nodded. She wanted the job. Or maybe she wanted proximity to Eric again. Maybe she thought this was a second chance for them, too. It didn't matter. Ava shook her hand at the door, holding it just a moment too long. Welcome back, she said, her voice smooth as silk. Then she shut the door with the faintest smile. The stage was set. The first night Madison moved in, Ava laid her head on the pillow beside Eric and pretended to sleep while her mind danced with fire. She could hear Madison down the hall unpacking. Her soft footsteps, the occasional thud of a suitcase, drawers opening and closing. It was the sound of a woman settling in. The woman who had slept with her husband. The woman Ava had invited back under her roof, not out of forgiveness, but strategy. Eric had been stunned when Ava told him she'd hired Madison. He'd blinked twice like he'd misheard her. You what? She needed work. We needed help. Ava had replied coolly, pouring herself a glass of wine. It's just temporary. For the kids. He hadn't argued. Not really. He just stood there, jaw tight, and nodded. If you're sure. I'm sure, she said, sipping the wine slowly. I believe in keeping things civil. Now, in the dark, Ava smiled to herself. She had no intention of making this arrangement civil. She intended to make it a quiet, exquisite hell. By Monday morning, the power shift was already in motion. Madison came down to breakfast wearing a faded hoodie and leggings, trying to look casual. But her eyes darted quickly from Ava to Eric, as if measuring the temperature in the room. Ava greeted her with effortless kindness. Morning. Hope you slept well. The kids are excited to see you. Madison smiled, tentative. Thanks again for all of this. Ava leaned across the island, handing her a color-coded schedule. Here's the week ahead. School drop-offs, meals, piano lessons. Oh, and I put a note on there for your laundry times. The washer gets testy if it's overloaded. Madison took the paper like it was a contract with hidden ink. Got it. Looks super organized. I try, Ava said, her tone neutral. You'll settle in. When the kids came bounding into the kitchen and shrieked Madison's name, hugging her like she was a long-lost friend, Ava watched it all unfold with surgical detachment. Madison glowed for a moment, but only for a moment, because Ava made sure she also saw something else. Ava's hand resting lightly on Eric's shoulder. The way he didn't pull away. Every move Ava made was measured. She left her laptop open with glowing emails from clients. She took video calls in the kitchen with the kind of quiet authority Madison couldn't mimic. She wore lipstick on Tuesday, heels on Wednesday. And on Thursday night, when Eric came home late, Ava kissed him at the door. Soft, confident, and just long enough for Madison to hear it from the hall. No fights, no scenes, just steady, controlled dominance. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had already won the room. Now all she had to do was let Madison figure that out for herself. And that kind of realization was always the slowest, most painful kind. By the end of the first week, the walls were closing in on Madison, and Ava hadn't lifted a single cruel finger. She simply let reality do the talking. Every morning started the same. Ava was already dressed before sunrise, makeup flawless, coffee brewed just the way she liked it. She'd kiss her children, tuck their lunchboxes into their backpacks, then disappear into her home office where her world ran on sharp thinking and sharper instincts. Madison, meanwhile, shuffled in late. Eyeliner smudged, ponytail crooked, still adjusting to the rhythm of a household that no longer treated her as a guest. She folded laundry while Ava closed deals. She scrubbed glitter off hardwood floors while Ava signed contracts. She waited at the school gate with other nannies while Ava's name was listed as CEO in a new Business Journal's feature on women redefining leadership. Ava made no effort to rub it in. She didn't have to. The contrast did the work. Eric stayed mostly quiet, uneasy. He moved through the house like a man tiptoeing through a war zone with no idea where the landmines were buried. Ava let him sweat. She let him lie beside her at night and wonder whether she knew, whether she suspected, whether she would ever mention the word affair aloud. She never did. She simply turned down the lights, rolled to her side, and made him sleep with his guilt while she dreamed of the empire she was building from the ashes he left behind. It was on Friday afternoon that the first real crack appeared. Madison stood in the hallway with a basket of unfolded laundry, her eyes glassy and red. Ava had just returned from a client lunch, heels in one hand, phone in the other, laughing at a message on her screen. She looked up and saw Madison frozen there like a child caught in the middle of a mess she couldn't explain. You okay? Ava asked, keeping her tone neutral. Madison nodded too quickly. Yeah, just tired. Laundry's not urgent, Ava said, walking past her toward the kitchen. Go rest. There's a glass of rosé in the fridge with your name on it. Madison hesitated. You're being really nice. Ava turned back, her smile unreadable. Why wouldn't I be? And there it was. the silence, the flicker of shame in Madison's eyes, the weight of kindness where cruelty was expected. Ava let it sit there between them, sharp and invisible. As Madison shuffled off toward the guest room, Ava leaned against the counter and finally allowed herself to breathe. Not because she was tired, not because she needed a break, but because she could feel it. Control tightening like silk around the throat of the girl who had once tried to steal her life. Ava wasn't just surviving the betrayal. She was rewriting the story and making Madison live in the pages. Saturday morning arrived with sunlight spilling across the marble countertops and the smell of fresh pancakes wafting from the kitchen. Ava moved through the house like a woman who had nothing to prove. Because in truth, she didn't. The proof was already stitched into every detail Madison couldn't unsee. Eric was on edge. He'd offered to take the kids to the park so Ava could rest, which was laughable considering she'd already done yoga, answered 6 emails, and closed a small design contract by 9 a.m. But she smiled and handed him the sunscreen anyway, watching him fumble through his guilt like a man waiting to be sentenced. With the house quiet, Ava turned her attention to the guest room. Madison's door was cracked open, just enough. The room, once a cozy haven for visiting friends or her sister during the holidays, now housed Madison's mismatched chaos. Bras draped over the back of the chair, a curling iron still plugged in, her life packed hastily into the corners of a room she never thought she'd return to. Ava knocked lightly and pushed the door open. Madison sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone with her knees tucked under her like a teenager hiding from consequences. "Hey," Ava said, stepping in. Madison startled. "Oh, sorry, I thought you were out." Ava leaned against the doorway, casual. "Just wanted to talk for a second. About your role here." Madison blinked. "Am I doing something wrong?" "No," Ava said, and then let that word hang there before continuing. "Actually, you're doing exactly what I hoped you would." There was a pause. Madison tilted her head, uncertain. "I know about you and Eric," Ava said, her voice even. Calm, surgical. Silence. Madison's breath caught so sharply it made Ava want to smile. "I've known for weeks," she added, "long enough to read the texts, the hotel confirmations, the lingerie in my drawer." Madison's eyes welled instantly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Just panic. "I didn't bring you here to punish you, Madison," Ava continued. "I brought you here so you could see exactly what you tried to take from me." Tears slipped down Madison's cheeks now, helpless and wordless. "I want you to see my life," Ava said. "The home, the career, the children who adore me, the man who's still sleeping under my roof, unsure if I'm going to leave him or end him." Madison swallowed hard. I didn't mean to." Ava raised a hand, stopping her. "Don't lie. Not to me. Not now. You made your choice, and now you're going to watch what it looks like when the woman you betrayed doesn't fall apart, but rises." She turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. "Dinner's at 7. I'm having guests over. Wear something black, clean, not desperate." Then she walked away, heels clicking softly against the hardwood. She didn't need Madison's apology. She needed her presence, to witness what winning looks like. Dinner was set for 7 sharp. Ava made sure of it, not because her guests were particularly punctual, but because precision was part of the performance. The table was dressed in crisp white linen, gold-rimmed plates, flickering candlelight. It wasn't a party. It was a showcase. Eric didn't ask questions. Not when she told him to wear the gray button-up he hadn't touched since their anniversary dinner last year. Not when she handed him the wine list she'd pre-selected, or when she set place cards down like chess pieces. He followed her lead, knowing full well he'd lost the right to challenge her moves. Madison emerged from her room 10 minutes before the doorbell rang. She wore a simple black dress, short-sleeved, high neckline, modest but nervous. Her hair was pinned back, her makeup lighter than usual. She looked like a girl trying to blend into a painting she didn't belong in. Ava met her at the foot of the stairs. "Perfect," she said, adjusting a stray strand of hair behind Madison's ear like a mother correcting her daughter before prom. Just remember, smile, pour the wine, clear the plates, and try not to cry this time. Madison's cheeks flushed instantly. Ava, No apologies tonight, Ava said sweetly. This is a celebration, remember? By 8, the house was buzzing with polite laughter and casual glamour. A few colleagues from Ava's agency, her friend Nadine from law school, a financial consultant Eric had once begged to impress, and who now sat comfortably beside Ava, watching her every move like she was the center of gravity. Madison floated in the background, quiet and small. She poured. She served. She refilled glasses with shaky hands and forced smiles, but Ava saw it. The way her eyes darted toward Eric every time he laughed at one of Ava's quips. The way she flinched when someone asked about the artwork hanging in the hallway, and Ava casually said, "Oh, that was a wedding gift," from someone who actually understood permanence. Every word Ava spoke was measured, her laughter effortless, her control complete. She didn't have to humiliate Madison in front of anyone. Madison was already doing that to herself. After dessert, as guests trickled out and the evening wound down, Ava walked into the kitchen to find Madison rinsing dishes, mascara smudged slightly beneath her eyes. "You did well tonight," Ava said, her tone almost kind. Madison didn't respond at first. Then, barely above a whisper, "Why are you doing this to me?" Ava tilted her head. "Doing what?" "This, whatever this is." Ava stepped closer, her voice low and lethal. "Letting you exist in the shadow of the woman you thought you could replace? That's not cruelty, Madison. That's mercy." She left her standing there with soap on her hands and shame in her throat. Ava didn't scream. She didn't gloat. She simply let Madison serve the life she tried to steal. The days blurred together after that night. Ava's life unfolded with perfect rhythm. Meetings, calls, family dinners, all choreographed to her liking. The house was the same as always, immaculate, welcoming, but every corner now held a layer of tension. It wasn't that Madison had changed. No, it was that Ava had given her the rope to hang herself, and now it was only a matter of time before the weight of her own mistakes would pull her down. Eric's discomfort grew every time Madison entered the room. He couldn't quite figure out what Ava was doing. He thought he'd understood her after all these years, but now there was a distance between them he couldn't bridge. He came home earlier from work some nights, hanging around the house as if waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Ava ignored him. She didn't need to explain anything. She was content in the quiet, knowing that Madison's presence would soon unravel her further. But it wasn't Eric who cracked first. It was Madison. It happened on a Tuesday, just a few days after the dinner party, when the kids were at school and Eric was in a meeting. Ava had left her office door open so she could hear the sounds of the house. Keys dropped on the counter, the creak of the floorboards. She could sense Madison's unease, the way she moved through the house like a ghost, unable to escape the quiet judgment in every room. Ava stood up and walked to the kitchen, where she found Madison scrubbing at the same spot on the counter. The motion was frantic, erratic, an attempt to do something, anything that could erase the growing discomfort in the air. Madison glanced up when she heard Ava approach, her face pale, eyes wide with something that was half terror, half defiance. "I didn't want to hurt you," Madison whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." Ava leaned against the doorframe, studying her. Madison looked exhausted, as if the weight of the guilt had been wearing her down every moment since she'd stepped back into Ava's life. Ava knew this. It was exactly the feeling she'd hoped to create. "You already did," Ava said, her voice as smooth as ever. "But you're still here. That's the part you don't seem to understand. I'm letting you be here, in my home, serving my family. I could have kicked you out the second I found out. But I didn't. And now? Now you're just living with the consequences." Madison's hands stopped moving, the rag in her grasp hanging limply. She didn't look at Ava, staring at the counter instead. Ava could almost see her crumbling under the weight of her own choices. I can't keep doing this, Madison said softly, her voice breaking. I can't pretend like this isn't hell. Ava's lips curved into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. You're not pretending, Madison. This is hell, and you deserve it. You made this bed. Now lie in it. Madison inhaled sharply, her eyes flicking up for just a second as if searching for an ounce of sympathy. Ava didn't give it to her. She didn't need to. Madison had been given enough space. Enough time to see exactly where she stood in Ava's world. Maybe one day you'll understand the grace I've shown you, Ava continued, pushing off from the door frame and turning toward the hallway. But I doubt it. She paused at the threshold. I'm not the one who needs to apologize, Madison. You're the one who has to live with yourself, and that's punishment enough. She walked away, leaving Madison to digest the quiet destruction Ava had left in her wake. This was the slow burn, the patient kind of revenge that kept you in control while the other person drowned in their own regret. And Ava? She was enjoying every moment of it. The days following that conversation with Madison unfolded like an intricate chess match. Ava moved through the house with a calm, composed air that seemed to unsettle everyone around her. Madison's unease had only deepened since their exchange, her movements more erratic, her presence smaller. She no longer lingered in the kitchen or interacted with the kids as warmly as she had before. Her smile, once so practiced, was now a shadow of itself. Ava noticed every little shift, every tremor in Madison's composure. And yet, Ava said nothing. She let the silence fill the spaces between them, the kind of silence that was louder than any confrontation could ever be. Madison, caught in the weight of her guilt, was left to suffocate under the pressure of her own actions. Eric, for his part, remained oblivious to the growing tension. He had stopped asking questions about the nanny situation, perhaps sensing the thin ice he was walking on. Ava no longer made an effort to reassure him. His discomfort was a small price to pay for the control she was gaining. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky and the children played outside, Ava found herself in the living room, flipping through design plans for a new project. She could hear Madison moving in the hallway, the subtle squeak of her footsteps against the polished floorboards. Ava glanced up, her gaze meeting Madison's briefly as she passed by. Everything okay? Ava asked, her voice as casual as if they were discussing the weather. Madison froze, and for a split second, Ava saw it. The flash of panic in her eyes, but it was quickly masked by a forced smile. Yeah, fine, Madison said too quickly. I was cleaning the guest room. Ava set the plans down slowly, her eyes never leaving Madison's. You've been working hard lately, she said, her tone light. But you shouldn't overdo it. You're here to help with the kids, not to do everything yourself. You deserve a break, too. Madison nodded, the tension in her shoulders still visible despite her attempt to hide it. Thanks, I appreciate it. Ava watched her retreat to the guest room, a small smile tugging at her lips. She didn't need to say more. Madison was starting to break down, piece by piece, and Ava was the calm in the storm. But she wasn't going to rush it. No, she would let Madison slowly crack under the weight of her own conscience. Later that evening, when dinner was over and the kids were settled for the night, Ava found herself alone in the living room with Eric. He had been quieter than usual, absorbed in his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ava, ever the picture of composure, made herself comfortable on the couch beside him. Is everything okay with work? She asked, her voice soft but deliberate. Eric glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Yeah, just a few things. Nothing to worry about. Ava let the silence hang in the air for a moment. You know, she began, her voice turning slightly more casual. I've been thinking about what we've been through these last few months. Eric shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. I know it's been tough, but we'll get through it. We always do. Ava smiled, just the slightest curve of her lips. We always do, don't we? She repeated. But there was something in the way she said it, something that made Eric stiffen. She knew his mind was racing now, trying to figure out whether she was referring to their marriage, their relationship with the kids, or something else entirely. The truth was, Ava wasn't referring to any of it. She was simply letting him feel the weight of his own actions. She didn't need to speak the words aloud. He was already asking himself the questions that mattered most. "How's Madison doing?" Eric asked, his voice tight. Ava's smile widened ever so slightly. "She's fine. But Eric," she said, her voice lowering, "don't forget, we're moving forward. And if you really want this to work, if you want us to work, you need to keep up." Eric's eyes flickered just for a moment, but Ava could see it. The briefest flash of guilt, a crack in his stoic facade. She leaned back on the couch, her posture relaxed, but inside, she was already 3 steps ahead. Madison had no idea what was coming. And Eric? He was starting to feel the weight of the trap closing in around him. The game was getting interesting now. The following week, Ava took another step forward in her plan, one that felt almost indulgent in its precision. She had never been one to settle for just surviving. She had always been about thriving, rising above, standing taller. And now, with each move, she was reminded that her power lay in patience, in making the enemy do the work of breaking themselves. She didn't need to confront Madison or even Eric. They were both hanging themselves with the rope she'd provided. It was almost too easy, too predictable. But that was the beauty of it. Revenge, when done right, didn't require grand gestures or loud proclamations. It required subtlety, grace, and above all, control. By the time the weekend came around, Ava had already mapped out the perfect plan. She'd taken the kids to a nearby museum, leaving Eric to tend to his own business, which now mostly revolved around looking over his shoulder. Madison, still tentative and unsure, had the house to herself. She seemed to take comfort in the fact that Ava wasn't constantly hovering. But Ava knew Madison's confidence was a fragile thing, built on a foundation of guilt and self-doubt. Ava was going to give her just enough rope to hang herself. Ava spent the day in town, running errands, meeting clients, enjoying the kind of freedom that came from knowing she held the upper hand. By the time she returned, the house felt different. Quieter, as if it were holding its breath. She walked through the door and immediately heard Madison's voice in the kitchen, murmuring to herself, though it was clear she wasn't alone. Ava didn't have to guess. She knew who Madison was talking to. She stood in the entryway for a moment, listening to the uncomfortable exchange. Madison was trying too hard to sound casual, but Ava could hear the strain. It wasn't enough that Madison had betrayed her trust. Now she was talking to Eric in that way. That soft, almost flirtatious tone that she thought Ava wouldn't notice. As if the distance between them could be erased with a few innocent words. Ava's lips curved into a smile. It was time. She walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking with purposeful intent. Eric looked up, startled, as if he'd been caught off guard by her presence. His eyes widened, but he didn't speak. Madison, on the other hand, froze, her hand still halfway to the kettle, as if the act of making tea could shield her from the confrontation she knew was coming. "Didn't expect to find you here," Ava said, her voice cool but laced with something sharper beneath the surface. She turned to Madison, her gaze unflinching. "How are you settling in?" Madison stammered, caught off guard by Ava's sudden appearance. Just making tea. Thought I'd—" "No need to explain," Ava interrupted smoothly. She glanced at Eric, who seemed to be squirming under her gaze. "I know how much you love tea, Madison. It's just so soothing, isn't it?" Madison's cheeks flushed, but she kept her gaze down, unable to meet Ava's eyes. Eric stood there, awkward, unsure of how to handle the tension that now filled the room. Ava moved past them both, toward the fridge, opening it and casually pulling out a bottle of white wine. She didn't ask, didn't offer. She simply poured herself a glass, taking a slow sip as she turned to face them. "You know," she continued, her tone light, as if they were discussing nothing more than the weather. "I've been thinking a lot about boundaries lately. And trust. Those things tend to get trampled when people forget that they're not as invisible as they think. Madison swallowed hard. Eric shifted. But still, no one spoke. Ava set the glass down with a soft clink and turned to Madison. I'm going to be very clear with you, Madison. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. But what you've done, well, it's not something I'll ever forgive. You can stay here. You can keep doing your job. But I want you to understand one thing. You're living under my roof, and you will never, ever be on equal footing with me again. There was a pause. The air was thick, suffocating, and Ava could see the cracks in Madison's carefully maintained composure. The facade was crumbling, piece by piece, and Ava reveled in it. Get a grip on yourself, Madison, Ava added, her voice colder now. You're not my equal, and you never will be. Madison opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She turned, gathering her things hastily, desperate to escape. Eric lingered, watching Ava, his expression unreadable. Ava didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She was in control. She was always in control. As Madison retreated to her room, Ava felt a flicker of satisfaction. This wasn't about Eric anymore. This wasn't about Madison. This was about taking everything back that she had lost, piece by piece, and watching them both suffer the consequences of their betrayal. The weeks following that moment in the kitchen felt like a slow, controlled burn. Ava knew that patience was key, and she embraced it with an almost frightening calm. She continued to move through her days with the same poise, the same cold elegance that had now become second nature. But beneath the surface, there was a quiet storm raging. Madison, though she never confronted Ava directly, had begun to wear her discomfort like a badge. She made herself scarce in the house, retreating to her room as often as possible when Ava was around. The forced politeness in her interactions with the kids had begun to feel hollow, almost mechanical. And Ava noticed it all. The stiffness in Madison's posture when she passed by. The nervous glances exchanged whenever their paths crossed. The tension was thick, like an invisible rope slowly tightening around Madison's neck. Eric, on the other hand, had become even more distant. His attempts at small talk had faded into nothing more than polite exchanges, and Ava could sense the guilt gnawing at him. The weight of his own actions seemed to suffocate him more than any confrontation could. But Ava didn't need to confront him. She didn't need to point out that she knew everything. He was already paying the price. One evening, as the kids settled in for the night and Eric retreated to his study, Ava found herself alone in the living room, reading through a new proposal for a client. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she glanced at the screen. Madison's name. Curious, Ava picked it up, and without hesitation, she unlocked the screen to find a single text message. I can't keep doing this, Ava. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. Ava sat back, the corners of her mouth curving upward. She had been waiting for this moment, the inevitable breakdown that would follow Madison's mounting guilt. She had been testing her, pushing her, and now Madison was finally buckling under the pressure. Ava's fingers hovered over the screen, contemplating her response. She could have been ruthless. She could have sent a cold, dismissive reply, something designed to remind Madison just how small she had become. But instead, she decided to keep playing the game. I know it's hard, but you made your choice. You can't unmake it now. She paused for a moment before adding another line. I'm not the one you need to answer to, but you know what you have to do. The question is, will you do it? Ava put the phone down with a sense of satisfaction, her heart not racing but steady in its beat. She wasn't waiting for a response. She knew Madison was already spiraling, already on the verge of collapse. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was shorter, less frantic. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this. Ava's lips parted in a thin smile. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Madison had finally admitted her guilt, and that was all Ava needed. The silence that followed felt like a victory. That night, as Ava lay in bed, her mind wandered over the course her life had taken. It wasn't about the affair anymore. It wasn't about Madison or Eric. It was about something deeper, something much more personal. It was about control. It was about reclaiming what had been taken from her and reminding everyone, especially herself, of her own power. And Madison? She was just the pawn in a game that Ava had long since mastered. The next morning, Ava walked into the kitchen with the same composed grace as always. Madison was there, already preparing breakfast for the kids, her movements stiff and awkward. Ava couldn't help but notice how small she had become in the wake of everything. She poured herself a cup of coffee and smiled politely. "Good morning, Madison." Madison stiffened but nodded. "Morning." Ava's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. There was no need to say anything. Everything that needed to be said had already been communicated. Madison knew she had been broken, and Ava had no intention of letting her forget it. The game wasn't over yet, but Ava was winning, and she was content to watch as Madison played out the final moves of her self-destruction. The next few days passed slowly, and Ava could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't the constant hum of the house she was used to. The energy, once vibrant and full of life, had turned dull, heavy with an unspoken tension that seemed to settle on every room like a thick fog. Madison was withdrawing even further, and Ava could see it in the way she moved through the house, now almost entirely silent, her presence an afterthought. Eric, too, was growing more and more restless. His attempts at conversation had become perfunctory, and his eyes lingered on Ava less with affection and more with an uncomfortable distance. He seemed to be waiting for something. An apology, a declaration, an outburst. But Ava gave him none of those things. She didn't need to. She was playing a different game now, one that had nothing to do with Eric and everything to do with making Madison see the cost of what she had done. One afternoon, as the house settled into its usual quiet, Ava decided to test the waters. She'd been leaving Madison alone for the most part, watching her crumble bit by bit, but today she wanted to see just how far Madison had fallen. She needed to know if the guilt, the weight of everything she'd done, had finally broken her. She found Madison in the kitchen again, preparing a snack for the kids. Her hands moved mechanically, eyes focused on the task at hand, but there was something hollow in her demeanor now, something Ava hadn't seen before. The girl who had once so confidently played the part of the perfect nanny was no longer there. In her place was a shell, a woman who seemed to be slowly suffocating under the weight of her choices. Ava walked into the kitchen, casually picking up a fruit bowl and placing it on the counter. She didn't immediately speak, simply letting the silence stretch between them. She knew Madison was aware of her presence, but the girl didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her in any way. "You've been quiet lately," Ava said, her voice light but cutting through the silence with precision. Madison flinched at the sound of her voice but didn't respond. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the plate down, her eyes glued to the counter. Ava let the silence stretch out longer, her gaze never leaving Madison's. The weight of it was palpable. "I know this must be hard for you," Ava continued, her tone now softer, almost sympathetic. "I know it's difficult to live with the consequences of your actions, but what you've done, you can't take that back, can you?" Madison's lips parted slightly, and for a moment, Ava thought she might speak. But then she just shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Ava's eyes softened, but only slightly. "It's not about me, Madison. It's about the life you've destroyed. You've taken something that wasn't yours, and now you get to watch it all slip away." Madison's shoulders slumped, her head hanging lower, and Ava could see the defeat in her posture. She wasn't the confident, charming woman who had once so easily slipped into their lives. She was a broken version of herself, shattered by the consequences of her choices. Ava stepped closer, her voice a soft, almost reassuring murmur. "You'll be fine. You'll survive this. You'll just have to live with it. Every day for the rest of your life." Madison looked up at her then, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and despair. She opened her mouth as if to say something more, but Ava held up her hand. No need for apologies. I don't need them. What I need is for you to understand this. Every action has a price, Madison, and you're paying yours. For a long moment, Madison didn't speak. She simply stood there, her face etched with the weight of everything she had done, everything she had lost. Ava turned away, walking toward the door, but she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder and spoke, her words slow and deliberate. I'll give you a few more days. I'm sure you'll figure out what comes next. But don't forget, you're in my house. And you'll do things on my terms now. With that, Ava left the room, the quiet satisfaction of her control settling over her like a cloak. She had broken Madison down completely, and now there was nothing left to do but wait for the final collapse. But Ava knew one thing for sure. She was the one in control now, and she wasn't going to let anyone forget it. The days felt longer now, stretched thin by the ever-present tension in the house. Madison had retreated further into herself, the weight of her guilt hanging around her like a suffocating fog. Ava couldn't help but watch her, the way Madison moved more slowly now, more deliberately, as though she were trying to avoid stepping on cracks in the floor. Each step a reminder of what she had done and what she had lost. Ava had given her space, sure, but she knew it was only a matter of time before Madison could no longer bear the suffocating quiet of it all. The control Ava had exerted over her life was becoming impossible to ignore, and Ava could see it. Madison was starting to crack, and with it she was beginning to break in ways Ava could only have dreamed of. One evening, as Ava sat in her office catching up on emails, her phone buzzed with a message from Madison. The mere sight of the name sent a surge of satisfaction through her veins. Can we talk? I need to apologize. For everything. Ava hadn't expected Madison to come crawling quite so soon, but it was exactly what she'd been waiting for. With a deliberate calm, she set her phone aside and stood up, her movements graceful and slow, savoring the feeling of the game nearing its end. She made her way to the living room where Madison had been sitting on the couch, staring at the floor as though lost in thought. The TV was on, but it was muted. Madison didn't even look up when Ava entered, and Ava couldn't help but take a moment to drink in the sight of her. The woman who had once been so confident, so sure of herself, now reduced to this fragile version of what she had been. Ava took a seat opposite her, crossing her legs with casual grace. Her voice was calm, but it carried that undeniable weight of power that Madison could no longer deny. You wanted to talk? Ava said, her eyes never leaving Madison's face. Madison looked up, her eyes filled with exhaustion and guilt. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then faltered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, Ava. For everything. I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt you. Ava's gaze softened, but there was no warmth in it. You didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. You've spent the last few months turning my life upside down, Madison, destroying everything I worked for. Madison's lips trembled, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as if she were trying to keep herself together. I never wanted any of this. I don't know why I did it. I didn't think. I got lost in what I wanted, and I never considered what it would cost. Ava let the silence stretch for a moment, watching Madison squirm under the weight of her own words. And now? Now you're sorry? Now you're trying to apologize for something you've already destroyed? Madison shook her head. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I need to make things right. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. Ava stood up slowly, her movement deliberate and calm. She crossed the room, standing just in front of Madison, who couldn't meet her eyes now. Ava reached out, gently placing a hand on Madison's shoulder. No one's asking you to make things right, Madison, she said softly, but there was an unmistakable edge to her voice. You can't fix what you've broken, and you'll spend the rest of your life living with the consequences. Madison's eyes welled with tears, and for a brief moment, Ava almost felt something stir within her. A flicker of sympathy, a trace of humanity. But it was fleeting, gone in an instant, replaced by the cold realization that this was how it was meant to be. Madison had played her part, and now, like all things in Ava's life, it was time for her to bow out gracefully. "You made your choice," Ava said, her voice low but firm. "And now you'll live with it. You'll stay here under my roof serving my family. But understand this, Madison. You're never going to be part of my world again. Not in the way you thought. You're here because I've allowed it. And that's the only reason." Madison nodded, her body trembling, her face streaked with tears. She didn't argue. She didn't try to fight back, because deep down she knew Ava was right. "Go to bed, Madison," Ava said softly, her tone devoid of malice. "We'll talk again tomorrow, but know this. The only thing you can do now is accept the consequences of your actions and learn to live with the emptiness that comes with it." With that, Ava turned and walked away, leaving Madison to sit in the silence of her own destruction. Ava didn't need to win. She already had. The silence that followed was deafening. Ava had spoken the truth, and Madison knew it. She didn't need to say another word. The weight of everything had finally settled in, sinking deep into Madison's bones, and she felt it all. Every lie, every betrayal, every mistake that had led her here. There was no escaping it now. Madison spent the following days in a haze, moving through the motions but never truly present. She no longer tried to engage with the kids like she had before, her laughter no longer genuine, her smile just a mask she wore for appearances. When Ava was near, Madison shrank back, aware of every breath, every glance, and the quiet power that Ava had over her. But Ava didn't need to speak to Madison anymore. She didn't need to drag the past up or keep making her feel small. The real punishment, Ava knew, was living with the truth day in and day out. It was Friday afternoon when the message came through. Madison had texted Ava, "Can we talk? I need to leave." Ava didn't answer immediately. She sat at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, considering. She knew what this was. Madison had finally realized what she'd been unable to admit before. There was no place for her here. Not anymore, and the weight of it was more than she could bear. After a few moments, Ava typed her reply. "I'm not stopping you." A simple response, but it was all Madison needed to read. Ava wasn't going to beg her to stay. She wasn't going to make a show of it. She had won, and she wasn't going to stoop to making Madison feel more important than she was. The choice had always been Madison's to make. A few hours later, Madison came into the living room, a bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes tired and red-rimmed. Ava had already known, of course. She could tell by the way Madison carried herself how the tension had become unbearable, how her attempts to put on the act had grown weak. She was done. Ava stood, her movements slow, deliberate. She didn't say anything right away. She just watched Madison, giving her time to make her final move, to acknowledge what she had done. Madison opened her mouth to speak but faltered. She bit her lip, then shook her head. "I can't do this anymore. I can't stay here." Ava gave a small, almost pitying smile. "I know. I'm sorry," Madison said, her voice barely a whisper. She took a step forward as if expecting Ava to offer some form of closure, some hint of forgiveness. But there was nothing from Ava, only that cold, calm look that had become second nature. "You'll be fine, Madison," Ava said, her voice calm and unwavering. "You'll move on. You'll go somewhere new, do something else. But you'll never forget what you did. Not because I won't let you, but because you can't let yourself forget." Madison nodded, tears brimming in her eyes, and turned toward the door. She reached for the handle but paused before leaving, taking one last look at the life she had once briefly shared with Ava. "Goodbye," Madison whispered, her voice raw. Ava didn't respond. She didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. Madison left, and as the door clicked shut behind her, Ava let out a slow breath. She didn't feel satisfaction. She didn't feel rage. What she felt was the heavy finality of it all, the end of the game. But Ava wasn't finished yet. There was one final move to make. She wasn't going to let this moment slip by unnoticed. She picked up her phone, dialed a number, and waited for the other end to pick up. Yes, this is Ava Morgan. I need to schedule an appointment for a meeting. I think it's time I make a few changes. She smiled to herself as she hung up. The world was shifting around her, and once again, she had control. Madison might be gone, but the real game Ava knew was just beginning. The following week was a whirlwind. Ava moved through her days with a grace that could only come from knowing her place in the world. Secure, untouchable, and untethered by the mistakes others had made. She had taken everything that was hers, and now she was ready to rebuild, to start fresh, to make the future her own. Eric remained distant. He hadn't asked any questions about the meetings she'd attended or the changes that were happening in the company. He had learned the hard way that Ava no longer cared about his confusion or his guilt. She had already moved beyond him, but that didn't mean she was done. Not by a long shot. It was late Friday evening when she heard the knock on the door. The sound was soft at first, as if hesitant, but there was no mistaking who it was. Ava had been expecting this. She didn't need to check the security camera to know it was Eric. His presence had become a shadow in her life, a reminder of everything she had walked away from. When she opened the door, he stood there, looking weary and broken. His suit was wrinkled, his tie slightly askew. His face looked older than it had a few months ago, and his eyes, those eyes that once held so much confidence, now held only regret. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice quiet, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to. Ava stepped aside, allowing him in without saying a word. She didn't need to invite him. She had already won. He was here on her terms now. They sat in the living room, the silence between them heavy, almost suffocating. Ava didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. She had already said everything that needed to be said. Eric, however, fidgeted, clearly struggling to find the words. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice still soft, almost hesitant. "About everything that's happened, about Madison, about what I did to you." Ava didn't interrupt him. She merely waited, her gaze cool, unwavering. She had no need for his apologies, no need for him to say what he thought she wanted to hear. She had already made peace with the fact that his actions were beyond her control. "I fucked up, Ava," Eric continued, his voice thick with regret. "I hurt you. I hurt our family. I let it all happen and I didn't stop it." Ava's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't a warm one. It was cold, calculated, just the way she had learned to mask her emotions over the years. "You did more than hurt me, Eric. You tried to destroy everything I've worked for." Eric flinched, but Ava didn't soften. She couldn't. The woman who had allowed herself to be hurt and betrayed was no longer there. She had shed that skin long ago. "I never wanted to destroy you, Ava," Eric said, his voice cracking. "I never wanted any of this. But I'm asking you, please, can we just try to fix it?" Ava shook her head slowly. "It's too late for that. You had your chance to fix things. And you chose her over me. You chose the easy way out." Eric looked down at his hands as if he were ashamed of himself. Ava let him sit in that shame for a moment, enjoying the quiet satisfaction that came with watching him feel the weight of his own mistakes. "You're free to go now," Ava said after a long silence, her voice clear without hesitation. "I've already moved on. I've built my life without you. I don't need you to fix it. It's already fixed." Eric stood up slowly as if he didn't want to leave. "Goodbye, Eric," she interrupted, her voice calm but final. "There's nothing left to say." He hesitated, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to say something, but he couldn't find the words. Slowly, he turned and walked toward the door. Before he left, he looked back one last time. There was pain in his eyes, but there was also something else. Something darker. Regret, yes, but also a quiet understanding that the door was closed. Ava didn't watch him leave. She didn't need to. She had already won. She moved to the window, watching as he drove away, his car disappearing into the distance. When the house fell silent again, Ava felt a wave of relief wash over her, but not the kind she had expected. There was no anger, no bitterness, just calm. She had taken everything back: her power, her control, her life. And now, as she stood in the quiet of her home, Ava finally felt the satisfaction she had been waiting for. The game was over, and she had won.